for me, most of the people I worked with were absolutely genuine practitioners who, I mean, I guess that's opening up another topic, but for the most part, I was working with people I saw as sincere practitioners, but yet I could not really photograph their experiences. So I thought, oh, maybe spiritualism is just something you can't, it's not appropriate for photography. But then that's when I started doing research, and I realized that spiritualism and photography had been deeply entwined since both of their early beginnings, and that it was oddly appropriate to play with the photographic medium in spiritualist situations.
Right.
And sort of this there's this overlap between the two where they expose each other's complications or the kind of truth-telling capabilities of a medium and the truth-telling capabilities of a camera. You know, I'm not a medium, but I can understand it now on a level that it's hard to put into words. You know, I think it's just like a different way of, it's just a different frame on reality. So people, you know, there are some people who would, you know, have a dream and they would just say, oh, it's just a dream, or a spiritualist would say, oh, that's a message, that's an experience, you know, think. And I'm not just talking about the dream state, but just everyday consciousness. I just see it as like a different way, a different frame on reality. The next morning I was in her kitchen and I was making myself a cup of tea, and I grabbed her cupboard, and the cupboard had like a baked, you know, a ceramic knob. So it was a real fully ceramic knob, and I touched the knob and it exploded in my hand. So, you know, there's a process in spiritualism called Transfiguration, where you'll sit in a dark room with a red light, and when it works, it's almost like the only way to describe it is like as if you had taken a hallucinogenic drug.
Hello and welcome to episode 40 of The Spirit Box. Today we welcome American artist and photographer Shannon Taggart to talk about her project called SÉANCE, exploring the field and photographing the field of spiritualism. Shannon became aware of spiritualism as a teenager when her cousin received a message from a medium that revealed details about her grandfather's death. And in 2001, while working as a photographer, she began taking pictures where that message was received at a place called Lilydale in New York, which is also home to the world's largest spiritualist community. Now, this project has taken her all over the world and has lasted, I think, about 18 years in total. And the work is really phenomenal. The work is really interesting, and it's a beautiful juxtaposition of the kind of the nuances of the spirit world and art and science, and really the legacy of photography as a documentary form, but also as an art form. And I think it really captures the visual language of spiritualism and how that fits into the mysteries of the spirit world really well. So it was a really enjoyable show for me. I got to talk about photography, which I rarely get to talk about in a way that I never really get to talk about on the show. So that was good fun. So there's a bit more in the Plus show. We get into the nature of creativity. We get into photography and its relationship with high strangeness. And we talk about Shannon's work with in voodoo, which is really some really interesting stuff there to check out. If you want to check that out, then do join the Patreon, where you can get access to the Plus show, which comes out a week earlier, and lots of other cool bits of content. Anyway, I will stop waffling now and let's get into it. Shannon Taggart, you're very welcome to the Spirit Box.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. As I was just saying to you before we hit record, you're a juxtaposition of my two primary interests of photography and the other, the exploration of the spirit world. So I'm really thrilled to have you on, and I'm a big fan of your work. For the listeners who haven't seen any of Shannon's work, check the show notes. You'll see it now. And I'm sure you'll see a couple of bits of it as we go through the show. But her work's absolutely phenomenal. So I'm gushing already, Shannon. This is the embarrassing part. So I'll stop now. And before I start whispering on, could you tell the listeners a little bit about you and your work?
So I am a photographer. I guess I always struggle with what to call myself exactly now, but I began working as a photojournalist. In 2001, I was working for newspapers, and I was also working as a public relations photographer. And that kind of work wasn't that exciting to me. I mean, it was interesting, but it wasn't what I got into photography for. I always have loved like Deanne Arbus, or like the great street photographers like Gary Winogrand, like the really in-depth documentary work like Nan Golden. So I always wanted to do something, a long-term project that had a lot of weight to it, and my assignment work wasn't that weighty. It was actually a lot of like set up portraits, or not even just really, like, even the newspaper stuff wasn't really as journalistic as I would like. So in my spare time, I decided, oh, I'll do for the summer, I'll spend some time in Lilydale, New York, which it's a tiny town that's home to the world's largest spiritualist community. And I grew up nearby, and I had been interested ever since my cousin went there. My cousins used to go there for readings when I was younger. And one time one of my older cousins got a message from our deceased grandfather, and it was very dramatic. It revealed this crazy family secret about his death. And it had always stuck in my mind. And I thought, oh, I'll just go there, see what's happening there, make a little, like a short picture story about this quirky little town. And then I had no idea, but it expanded into this grand project that was 18 years. And the whole project kind of transformed me from a photojournalist into an artist and an author and a writer, as well as a photographer. And the photographs actually took a much more experimental track as I began researching and moving within this strange topic of spiritualism. So I guess that's me. So now I mean, I'm working on another book. So now I consider myself more of an artist and an author and a researcher and a photographer, all those things kind of combined.
Yeah. And was there I mean, you mentioned a relative getting a message through the spiritualist community. I mean, was there something in your youth that kind of led you there? Was there always a spiritual kind of interest there? They often say that, like, documentary photographers look at stuff they're interested in. Was that already there?
Well, yes. I mean, I grew up Catholic, Irish Catholic. I mean, I'm not, I'm an American, but my family's Irish Catholic. And, I was always fascinated by the lives of the saints, and I was taught by nuns, and my uncle was a bishop in the Catholic Church. So that whole Catholic mysticism was definitely of interest.
Yeah.
And one of the things I really appreciate about my Catholic upbringing is the introduction to Catholic art early on.
Right.
And so that was the iconography of Catholicism was like made a huge impression on me, and I think sparked my initial interest in art. So yeah, and I mean, I was always curious about mediums or getting messages or that kind of thing, but I never had any personal experiences until in high school. My cousin went to Lilydale, and she got that message.
Right.
It was just this really bizarre message where my deceased grandfather came to her through a medium and told her that the way that he died which actually turned out to be true. Like we thought he was in the hospital. We thought he died of brain cancer, but he actually died of asphyxiation. Um, and they said that somebody accidentally fed him while he was ill, and that so he choked, and that really is how he died. But we were always told he died of brain cancer.
Right. Okay.
So I just remember thinking at that young age, like, how could somebody possibly know that? Like, she didn't know my cousin's name. It had happened like 30 or 40 years prior. I mean, it was just very strange experience. So it just always stuck in my head. And around the same time, I discovered photography, but I never put them together until later.
Right. It's really interesting that kind of you refer to those two big sources as being kind of family and Catholicism, but also kind of with the cultural bend of kind of your Irish ancestry. I should have guessed from the name, to be fair. But like, I mean, as is it won't come as a surprise to you. I've got a very similar background to you, and I know what you mean. Like the impact of Catholic art and symbols, it stays with you. It really does, and I think there's almost like an aesthetic imprint that comes from it. I incidentally, like, when you look at kind of that influence and kind of the figures within the Catholic pantheon, I know you mentioned the saints, but was the Virgin Mary a big thing?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I also have, I have interest in Marian visions, and it's funny because I have researched and tried to do projects about Catholic iconography, and it depends. It obviously depends on the Catholic, you're talking to. Like, for example, in my family, it was, you could go and have readings. The spiritualists don't believe anything that we don't believe. It's
Right.
just that you shouldn't believe that over your Catholic faith, I mean. And a lot of or I should say not a lot, but several of the mediums in Lilydale were former nuns, priests, monks. So, that there was that strong connection there. But as if you get I've tried to work with certain Catholic groups on photo projects, and once they discover that I have worked with spiritualists,
right,
they become wary of me. And I also did another long-term project on voodoo.
Really awesome.
Yeah, and it depends on even though I am Catholic.
Yeah.
Just because I've looked into other realms, people are wary of me. I mean, not everybody, but it's several times in different projects I've tried to initiate. But I've done a lot of research on Marian vision specifically. There was a woman in Queens, New York, named Veronica Lucan, and her followers used Polaroid cameras. And so I'm very interested in the camera and Marian visions, and the visions of Mary, and that's but in the Virgin Mary herself, images of her obviously they're quite powerful for me, and I do have they're part of my own art collection as well.
Oh yeah. No, I yeah, very relatable. And it's one of those things that I think, like, culturally in Ireland and for Irish people and the Irish diaspora around the world, it's that thread goes straight through. I mean, like, Ireland is named after Erin, which is after a goddess. The Irish word for Ireland is Erin, which is a goddess. The rivers are all named after goddesses. It's our there's just a deep ingrained in the DNA of that island is goddess worship, and that absolutely comes to its pinnacle with the Virgin Mary. So I was kind of wondering if that was still a thing. So it's quite nice to hear as well.
Yes.
Excuse me. And you mentioned in your work about how you got quite experimental with the techniques of photography you're using, and it's certainly evident in your work. Obviously you're working in really low light conditions, and kind of the challenges that presents. But you seem to have turned those challenges into a form of artistic expression and identity to the images, which is really beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, I joke that, well, I mean, you can you're this is actually very interesting to me because you're the first photographer I've run up against in this paranormal world.
Right.
I've really struggled with trying to bring the language of photography together with the
Hmm.
language of the paranormal,
Hmm.
because there's not a lot of connections between those worlds. Uh,
Well, can I just commend you on it straight off the bat? I just think you've done a fantastic job. I
Thank
really do. The imagery is fantastic. Um, and I love this. I love the low light work. I love the kind of the slower shutter speed stuff. It's just fantastic. It really just it encapsulates so much. I love it.
thank you.
Sorry,
I
I'm
joke
not
that,
being. This is the easiest interview you're going to get from another photographer.
yeah, but I joke that I had to go through a process of unlearning,
Right.
because the techniques that I ended up using, or playing with the
Mhm.
most, were the ones that they teach you to abandon in
Mhm.
photo school.
Mhm.
When you're trained as a photographer, you're taught to control the medium
Mhm.
and to make it bend to your will.
Mhm.
And I started to do the opposite. I tried to invoke all the mistakes and accidents and play and messiness, or like unprofessional or tricky aspects of
Mhm.
photography.
And it works, and there's some bits in there as well. It's got like historical photographic, a sense of it. It goes right back to this kind of Victorian glass plate stuff of seances. I mean, there's some particular images. I assume it's of like kind of like ectoplasm, and that kind of thing, where it's straight back to that Victoriana, and I think that's a nice connection. I think it's a nice connection of actually you're doing modern photography, and you've got obviously got a camera with all the high ISO capability you need, but you're choosing to photograph this in a way that feels organic, and I think is suitable to the subject.
Yeah, so when I first started the project, after a while working on it, I got incredibly frustrated because, how do you photograph invisible things?
Mm,
I mean, I was in these situations with people where they're telling me they're having these intense conversations or experiences with spirits that I cannot see with my eyes. And I don't think that they're lying to me, but there was a genuine, for me, most of the people I worked with were absolutely genuine practitioners who, uh, I mean, I guess that's opening up another topic, but for the most part, I was working with people I saw as sincere practitioners, but yet I could not really photograph their experiences. So I thought, oh, maybe spiritualism is just something you can't, it's not appropriate for photography. But then that's when I started doing research, and I realized that spiritualism and photography had been deeply entwined since both of their early beginnings, and that it was oddly appropriate to play with the photographic medium in spiritualist situations.
right.
And sort of this, like, there's this overlap between the two where they expose each other's um, complications, or
Hmm.
the kind of truth telling capabilities of a medium and the truth telling
Hmm.
capabilities of a camera.
Yeah.
So, but that took me a long time to wrap my head around. So that's part of the reason it took 18 years to get this done. Yeah, yeah, very long time.
And I mean that's a remarkable, remarkable commitment to the work as well. I mean a lot of documentary product projects are a summer long or a year long or 18 months and or indeed a couple of weeks,
I
but
know.
18 years, it's remarkable.
Yeah.
um, Really interesting. um Now, I think one of the questions, I mean, I get a sense from you that you feel that there's something of depth here, with the people you've been working with, the subject matter you've been covering, and what you referred to at the start of the interview about your cousin's experience, and that knowledge that was revealed, that there was no way within kind of our normal understanding of who knows what, and how would they know something, that knowledge could be conveyed without some experience of the other. In this case, your grandfather who'd passed on. Has your view of the spirit world changed during this work? I mean, I know it's a long time period, but where have you gotten to from who you were when you started it?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. When I first began, I couldn't understand how these sane, lovely people I was meeting were telling me they could speak with dead people. But like, I couldn't hold the idea in my head that you could be a sane person and have a normal life and then yet also have these types of experiences. Like, it's just so foreign to our Western everyday way of being. Even, I mean, even if you're raised religious, which I was, it's still like that as a reality and experience that you're having. It just was so foreign to me. I guess that's the way I would just put it. Like, and getting to know people, that I started to really see how it worked for them. And also, I've taken mediumship classes, which I was just, you could have blown me over with a feather when I found out that you could teach mediumship, or that they believed that anybody can do this. They truly, spiritualists believe that this is, it's kind of like playing the piano. Some people are really good at it and some people could play chopsticks, but everybody can try and learn. So I have been in a number of vast number of class and experimental situations where it was put upon me to try. And one of my closest friends in the world, who I met through this project, is a medium. And it's through our friendship now, it's been 17, 18, 19 years probably we've been friends. So just by having her in my life and having her as my friend, but she also is a medium, there's a different level of understanding that comes along. And also research, and it's a hard thing to wrap your brain around if you don't come to it naturally. But I think I definitely came to a place where I can understand. Like, yeah, like when, I'm not a medium, but I can understand it now on a level that it's hard to put into words. I think it's just like a different way of, it's just a different frame on reality. So people, there are some people who would, have a dream and they would just say, oh, it's just a dream, where a spiritualist would say, oh, that's a message, that's an experience, things. And I'm not just talking about the dream state, but just everyday consciousness. I just see it as like a different way, a different frame on reality.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, digging a little deeper, obviously, kind of having attended, I mean, how many 18 years you must have been to, what, hundreds, maybe thousands of sessions. Have you had any experiences that really kind of were accelerants in shifting your paradigm? Were there experiences where you in particular received something in any of those sessions, or witnessed something even?
Yeah, I mean, I've had so many different experiences. I guess, I should frame it like this. I've had some truly mysterious experiences, but I've also had some truly ridiculous experiences, and like everything in between. And it's kind of like, I always say to people about, about Lilydale, like if you go to Lilydale, some people have the most mind-bending, they get a message from a medium and it rocks their world. Or like sometimes, people go and they just think they just have a terrible time and they just end up laughing at the whole thing. And I always say, like, it, all of that is embedded within it. And I kind of see it as Lilydale holds a space for us to have these experiences. It doesn't always work for everybody. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why some people, they go and every time they go, they get a great message from a medium and they have the great experience, and then there'll be people like me. It's like every once in a while I'll get like a mind-bending message, and then the rest of the time I can't make much sense of it. Yeah, so but yeah, I've had like my experiences span the gamut. And so I tried to, when I did the book, my publisher actually insisted that I write a text, and I didn't want to write a text. I just wanted to do like I wanted to do my photos and have maybe somebody interview me and I would just talk about it. And he said, no, that's much too casual, you really have to. So I went back to do the text for the book, and I went back to all, because when I first started this, I did some recordings, but I was just focusing on photography. I wasn't taking a lot of notes. I wasn't documenting everything that happened. And so I had to go through that, back to this process of like remembering everything, every weird experience. And I interviewed and called up almost everybody. I mean, a lot of people had died, had passed that I started to work with, because a lot of people in spirit, there's a joke that in spiritualism, it's the 60-year-olds learn from the 80-year-olds. A lot of people get into
Right.
spiritualism
Okay.
later.
Right.
So a lot of the spiritualists I had worked with had already passed. But the people who are still around, I think I did like 60 new interviews to write the text. And in that process of remembering, I tried to write as many of my experiences. And a lot of them are there's just a lot of different ones. And a lot I didn't put in because they're personal. But yeah, there's an experience I had where was sitting with one of the mediums where I write, where she says, I never sit in the dark, because whenever I sit in the dark, the next day something strange happens in the kitchen. And so she always sits under like a red light or something. But this one night we were in her home, and her name is Sylvia, and Sylvia sat in the dark. And as soon as she turned off the lights, I could hear it. We heard knocking in the walls, and we heard all these sounds, and it was really crazy. I had no idea how these sounds were happening. And then later the next morning, I was in her kitchen and I was making myself a cup of tea, and I grabbed her cupboard, and the cupboard had like a baked, a ceramic knob. So it was a real fully ceramic knob. And I touched the knob, and it exploded in my hands and cut my hand.
Whoa.
And I wouldn't have believed that it had happened, except that I saw it. It was broken half, clean, like ceramic, broken half. And the other half had flipped up to the ceiling and crashed to the floor. And I looked, and I had this deep, it was this finger, and I still have a scar, deep cut. And I was just like, what just happened?
Wow.
So that's one of the wilder things that has happened. But some of them are subtle. I mean, I've had umpteen gazillion messages, but before I did the book, my mother died, and we took on the day we took my mother off life support, my friend who's a medium, my close friend, had called me that day, and I said, I can't talk, we're at the hospital. And she said, oh, okay, I'll talk to you later. And then my mother passed, and then after my mother passed, my brother and my sister said, oh, we're going to get a tattoo for Mom. And my brother was saying what he was going to get, and my sister was saying she was going to get her signature. And I just kind of, oh, okay, whatever. And so then my friend Lauren texted me later, and she said, you're going to think I'm crazy, but your mom already came to me. And she said everything that my mom said. And then she said, and then right before she left, she said, tell them no tattoos.
Oh my God.
And then she took off like a hummingbird. And that was it. And she laughed and then took off. And Lauren didn't know that my sister and brother and I had that conversation. There's no way she could. So it's things like that.
Yeah.
I have probably a million stories.
Thank you for sharing that. One thing you mentioned there about kind of one of your friends using a red light, and that comes up in your photography a lot. Just what's the significance of the red light?
Well, actually, I discovered through my research that the red light is used in seances. It started because of photography, of seance photography, because
Really?
when they were
Okay, right.
using the plates,
Yeah.
you can use a red light in a
Hmm.
dark room. And
Hmm.
so um, because black and white materials are not sensitive to red light, I think now it's mostly used, it's almost always red light. Some people use blue or green or like, different colors, but for the most part it's usually red light. If there's a light on in a seance room, it's almost always red. And I think it's because of the sensory deprivation aspects, like, red light, we're less sensitive to it. So when it's dark and there's only red, it, I think it does help induce a hypnotic state.
Well, like it reduces like the tonal range. Yeah.
Yeah, like so there's a process in spiritualism called transfiguration, where you'll sit in a dark room with a red light, and when it works, it's like, it's almost like, the only way to describe it is like as if you had taken a hallucinogenic drug. You'll see the face of the person in front of you just shift and change, um and then just like fast. And a neuroscientist might say, oh, that's because our brain is, it has this compulsion to interpret patterns, and there's not enough information, so your brain is filling in these spaces, and that's why you're seeing things change. Where a spiritualist would say, no, that's spirit phenomena, that's ectoplasmic, that's like how it works. So that's what I mean about like the frame on reality. It's like they're both a scientist and a spiritualist might be acknowledging that this is something that happens when you sit in a dark room under a red light for a few hours, but they're assigning the meaning or the efficacy to different aspects of our brain.
Interesting. It really does kind of hammer home how intertwined this is with photography as well. I know it's so obvious now that you mentioned it.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of very highly strange and
mhm.
interesting connections between photography and spiritualism. Like one of my favorites is that the very first public seances in the United States were held on in Rochester, New York, down on the same street as where Kodak built its headquarters.
Oh, how cool.
So yeah, so there's this like physical connection between where photography and spiritualism was introduced to the public. Like there's a lot of really interesting synchronicities in a lot of ways, like in a lot of different ways. Yeah.
I suppose kind of even looking at these images and kind of like, and again kind of like knowing how challenging it would be to get an image in those kind of light conditions, it does kind of make you kind of realize how good the people were, 120 years ago, working with glass plates and
Yeah.
bellows and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. It's really yeah, it's nice to think back about
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
no. I mean, for me, people always ask, "Oh, do you like digital or film better?" And I have to say, now I began shooting film, but now that I'm shooting digital, the sensors are so much more sensitive than
Yeah.
film is. Also, I don't have to reload.
Yeah,
I don't
totally.
have to push my film.
Hmm.
I don't have, so technically it's become so much easier. But yeah, I mean, it's always, and even with that, it's always difficult to photograph in those types of situations.
I totally get that. I mean, I got asked the same question on a show recently. Do you miss the dark room? I said, well, I don't really. It was really hard to get film on coils. And also, it's nice to know if you've messed the shot up immediately, so you got
Yes.
another bite of the cherry, right? you know, but and film has a special texture, and I think when you go back maybe 10 years ago, you could sense a separation in that, or maybe even a bit further back, you could sense a separation between kind of digital and film. But I think now the the quality is so good that there's very little difference in the final image.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thankful that I was trained in a dark room. Also, I don't miss the chemicals or the smell, or like I hated that always.
Yeah, totally.
But I'm thankful that I had that, because I do try to process my images in a way where it's by darkroom standards.
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
So
It's a fantastic grounding. It really is a fantastic grounding. Excuse me. So, taking a slightly different turn, so you've photographed all over the world, really, in terms of this project.
mhm.
And what I wanted to ask you about that is, having traveled extensively and kind of, worked across the UK, the States, and kind of other areas. Are there any notable differences in how cultures perceive this phenomenon, or interact with this phenomenon?
Well, for whatever reason, spiritualism, it's an American born religion, and it was hugely popular in America before it went around the Western world, and then also, through different colonies, like, from France into like Brazil and Puerto Rico. And so it went from America to England and Europe, and then morphed into other forms. But today, it's not very present in United States, but I am surprised that it is in England and parts of Europe. And so that, and for some reason in England, it seems to be not as strange as it is in United States to practice spiritualism. I mean, there's like a lot more churches in England than there are in the United States, and England is the size of New York State, and the United States
Right,
is
right.
like 50 other states. But still, there's probably more spiritualist churches in England than there is in all of the United States. So I'm not sure what the reason is, why it's kind of stayed alive in England and not United States. There must be some cultural reason, and I'm not really certain what it is.
Maybe it's something to do with the decline in, I guess, conventional spirituality. Like Christianity in the UK is not as prolific as it was. I think. I mean, it's purely assumptive. I'm I'm just making gross assumptions here in broad strokes, but it's my podcast, so I suppose I can do it. But isn't that might be something to it? That, like, kind of like, I think, regular church practice, I think is in the decline in the UK, and has been for some time. Maybe people who are looking for spiritual meaning, it's an accessible thing.
Yeah, maybe. Or I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking maybe there's something about the Victorian era that is still special in England.
Yeah.
It's not as special in
Right.
US, I always thought too about the theatricality, like,
Right.
it's just in England, it's different. I don't, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the kind of, mm, yeah, it's hard to put my finger on, but yeah, something definitely. So that's why I ended up spending so much time in England, and then from there, you know, um, certain parts of Europe through connections I made in
Mm-hmm.
England. But that's why, I began in the world's largest spiritualist community, but I literally had to spend the most time in England, because that's where traditional spiritualism is the most alive.
So, in terms of kind of culturally, what nuances and differences might be in different locations, one of the things that I was kind of looking for with that is, like, differences in, say, the behavior from what comes through from the spirits, or certain types of manifestations. Was there anything kind of like thematically that kind of stood out that was different, or was it all really kind of different location but fundamentally the same experience?
So it is interesting because, you know, because spiritualism has the popularity has waned, the people who are practicing it now are all kind of aware of each other and influenced by one another. And it's a small community. So, for example, you'll have mediums. If there's a spiritualist medium who travels for seances, they're probably traveling to a certain number of churches in the United States, England, and Europe. They're probably all going to the same venues. So there's this like
Okay.
interchange, this cultural interchange between all of modern spiritualism and
Hmm.
Australia. There's a lot of churches in Australia, and there's a lot of information being exchanged and on
Mhm.
Facebook and you know, online. So it's this rebirth. I you know, to get down in the nerdy history of it all, is this is from my perception, and also that's why I started working as a researcher, really, because I was the only journalist kind of pursuing spiritualism for a long time. I mean, I still don't know of anybody. I mean, no, I met one filmmaker along the way, but I was pretty much on my own. So I had to do almost all of my own research. And I traced it back pretty much to the skull experiment in
Oh,
England.
wow. Okay. Right.
So what happened was, is in the 1990s, there was a seance group. I mean, there was still spiritualism happening, but you know, um, it was kind of moving towards like less seances and more clairvoyant, you know, what you would see on those popular TV shows. I don't know if you have them in the UK, but like here we have like the Long Island Medium, and you know, she's just in a room giving clairvoyant messages. So that's mostly what spiritualism became. But there was always people doing home circles. But then in the 1990s, there was a group called the Skull Experiment, and they started reporting all this seance phenomena, like and they were having traditional like dark Victorian seances, and there was people from the SBR there studying them, and they were creating all this evidence like pictures and videos, and so I think this sparked an interest in the dark room seance in these Victorian practices. And also this, they sparked an interest in using technology in combination with mediumship. And that from England, the skull experiment, it kind of reflourished and repopularized this long ago tradition in spiritualism. So what's happening now is almost like a renaissance in spiritualism, even though it's a tiny one. Like, for example, when I first began my project, there was nobody publicly saying that they did ectoplasmic seances. But now it's becoming more common. And so I was just in the right place at the right time, because I really do feel like it's there is this even though it's small, it's not as culturally large as it was when spiritualism first came about, but there are this new trend of bringing back these Victorian seances. So what, I guess, to answer your question, it's a lot of the same thing no matter what country you are in.
Right. Right. Okay. That's really interesting about the skull experiment. I'd no idea that there was kind of a lineage there, and of course, going back to that experiment, it famously uses photographic technology with
Yeah,
the film work.
yeah.
That's yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, there's so I got you know, I'm friendly with Robin Foy, and he was very helpful to me. He's one of the founders of the skull experiment. And so I was able to photograph some of their artifacts for the book. But I highly recommend the books that Robin has written
Right.
about the skull
Okay.
experiment. He's also written a book about his own experiences even prior.
Hmm.
He's a great writer. The books are incredibly detailed and strange, and a number of people have written about the skull experiment, but I find Robin's take on it was, and there's a lot of photographic seance phenomena that
Right.
they report. So, and I tried to tweak a lot of that symbolism in my book. So I was able to, with Robin and Sandra, his wife's permission, they allowed me to reproduce some of their images in the back of my book, in the
So
notes
cool.
section. And so that was like a big,
Yeah.
plus. I was very thankful. So I kind of try to trace the history.
I can really see that in kind of when you talk about the structure of the book in that way. Like, so yeah, I like that's a really, really cool kind of total connection right back to this significant event that started the whole thing off. And seeing some of the skull experiment stuff. I mean, did you get to see the film and the negatives and all that kind of stuff?
I didn't get to see the film and the negatives. I just got to
Okay.
see their collection of apports, which
Right. Okay.
an apport is an object that materializes in a seance room. And spiritualists believe that it dematerializes from one space and rematerializes in another. So it's kind of like a miracle object.
Right.
You know, even though spiritualists don't use the term miracle,
Mm-hmm.
spiritualists define it's they're always trying to merge science and religion and philosophy. That's like the main goal of any spiritualist seance. It's not just to create objects, it's to create evidence and proof that there is an afterlife and there are spirits, and that, you know, we don't die. This is just, you know, death is a transition. So I also often have to explain that spiritualists really resent being considered occultists, because they see themselves as Western rationalists and very much in line with science, and people have a hard time believing that, because, you know, there's a lot of complications there. But
So it's going to upset all the occultist listeners we have.
and I mean, but the big distinction is, you know, when a spiritualist is doing a seance, or when you go to see a medium, they're not doing anything like any kind of a magical ritual, meaning they're not they're not requesting any to change anything or to predict the future. Their intention is to create a connection or evidence of life after death, and bring forth healing or guidance, but not to, you know, an occultist would do a ritual, you know, depending on what their practice is or what they're doing, you might do a ritual to change reality, or like with an intention to make something happen. And that is a very big distinction. And but it's also, you know, a lot of people, you know, a lot of spiritualists like, oh, we're not pagans, but they have a lot in common with pagans. Yeah, I mean, meaning, you know, they're into nature and the spirit world and that type of communication. So, you know.
Yeah, and also, you know, that there's paraphernalia there. You know, there's certain objects like the trumpet, the table, that are used to, you know, um, move things along to help communication happen. You know, and I think from certain occult perspectives, those things would be seen as kind of occult tools that have a purpose. They may be kind of defined and labeled in different ways, but there's a ritualized sense to them. So one question I wanted to ask you as well is, what's the reaction being from the photographic community?
Well, I guess, you know, another reason that, you know, the book took me so long is because I really had to frame the project historically properly. So, you know, my book is basically three parts. The first part is a number of essays that with historical material that talk about the history of photography and the history of modern art in relation to spiritualism. And what I was doing is I always say, I discovered that spiritualism had this bizarre, really whacked out, very intense photographic history. And it was largely written out of all the photo history books. But I was kind of building on this whacked out, like very wild, grotesque and shocking.
Yeah.
And um, this imagery, I was working with it. I was building off of it. I was building another strange chapter on this strange, like far out tradition. There is a spiritualist tradition of photography. And when I would show it in the photo community, like it was lost. A lot of that symbolism was lost because nobody had ever seen there was not wide interest in these type of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like it wasn't really, I didn't find a lot of interest from the photo community itself. And so that's why I ended up doing a book that wasn't just for a photo book community. I did a book that was intended for multiple audiences.
Right.
And but it was important for me to say, no, this is part of photo history. And this is like an obscured area of photo history. And now there's more awareness, there's more interest, especially now in the art world. They're now acknowledging that the spiritualist painters, the female painters, were the first abstract expressionists. So almost all of art history is being rewritten right now. And one of the most popular, or the most popular show ever in the history of the Guggenheim Museum in New York was recently the Hilma af Klint show, and she's a spiritualist artist,
right,
who was written out of the history books. And so now it's a little bit easier and there's a little bit more interest. But for a while it was like beating my head up against the wall. And if I would show some of my images, people wouldn't get that I'm playing off of this weird imagery, or there wasn't a visual connection. And I like to say too that I feel like spiritualism was the first religion to make an iconography using photography rather than painting, but not very many people were aware of it. So I was literally working with the spiritualist iconography, but people weren't getting it.
Yeah. And I mean, you're so right. Like you're genuinely working with a legacy, a photographic legacy that's absolutely intertwined with this particular spiritual expression. It's really interesting to hear you say that people struggle to recognize that the thread of kind of visual language and symbolism and history that goes right back to the start of photography, with this subject matter. It was interesting for me looking at your work as well, because as I said to you as well, I think your work's amazing. And looking at it from kind of a documentary photography perspective, seeing the techniques you've used, where you're bleeding into art photography as well, and that I could imagine photo editors struggling to a degree to kind of go, I don't know where to put this, and therefore move on, and which can happen in kind of this industry, and but also there's also that bend to photography, and particularly documentary photography and photojournalism, where it's like the camera is a source of truth. The camera doesn't lie. And then you're into this scenario where you're talking about kind of communication with people who've passed on, with the spirit, and then obviously kind of spiritualism and then kind of our mediumship, broadly mediumship in a broader sense, from the Victorian perspective was famously being kind of just whitewashed with this idea that it's all fake, and actually people were using kind of early double exposures and this kind of stuff to create kind of these early fantastic images. I mean, did you get that kind of bias, towards your work?
Well, I mean, it took me a long time to understand that, I mean, and this is where the research comes in. So I worked on the project for a good 5 years and I just got stuck. I was like, nobody's that interested in these pictures. I don't know how I would ever, this is before I'm working with words and before I started doing research on my own. And it was too much of a mess. And so I left it. And I never intended to finish it. I just left it. And I left it for about 3 or 4 years. And in that time, I found I couldn't stop thinking about spiritualism though. So I started doing a lot of reading and I discovered a book called The Trickster and the Paranormal by George P. Hansen. And George's work, he's now a friend of mine and sort of like my mentor in the paranormal, I would say. But so through George's work, I understood that there's status loss with paranormal is often common. And that, that's why you see a lot of popular fiction films about the paranormal. When you make anything too real or bring it too close to reality, you're automatically going to get this repulsion, attraction thing happening. And it just comes with the territory. And so I understood that through George's work.
You've articulated that so well, and that's certainly been a learning from me, and it's really nice to hear it from yourself. Yeah, I've definitely lost gigs as a result of some of my work. It's a strange thing. I think I mean, I kind of get it. If I'm honest, I don't want to get it. I find that a little bit just jarring and upsetting because part of I think part of some of the great elements of photography has always been those people on the front line, those people that were wanted to explore, that wanted to see, and it's just another space, and it's such an incredible frontier. It seems such a shame that it has this stigma, and I guess there's a lot of work out there that doesn't help things as well. We got the kind of sensationalist TV stuff and kind of the kind of the paranormal YouTubers and all that kind of stuff, exploring haunted locations in a way that's a bit cheap.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely, there is a stigma for sure. I mean, and it just took me, because I thought all this stuff was just so fascinating, and especially the history but it really, it's not meant for everybody, and not everybody really wants to engage it in a deep way. People want to keep away from it. And for some people that's good. I mean, I even say, I now understand too why, because it disrupts some people's psyches, or I mean, it can be dangerous for some people. And also there's like this like ick factor that comes out, so now I understand that now. So it's a little bit easier now because I do understand it, but it's definitely still there. And especially some of my images, I mean, they're not pretty. I mean, I've said this before, and some people say, oh yes, but like there's some where it's, people have two faces, and there's like there's a, the grotesque in art is a thing, and that's something I've been thinking a lot about. And some of my images aren't that pleasant, and it's confusing to me even. And like even one of the mediums I worked with, I asked her, what do you think of this? People say these are scary pictures of you. There was one where she looked like she had transformed, and she said spirit is doing that so you react. It's that reaction, that's purposeful. It's like, this idea of the holy, like you can't, the holy is actually dangerous or scary when you see it. It's not something that can be tamed. It's something that should shock your system.
Okay.
And ectoplasmic images definitely shock the system. Um, and yeah, so I mean, I understand that. It's not something everybody wants to hang on their wall, you know.
Oh, Shannon, that's really made me laugh because that is direct. You could almost quote verbatim that has been said to me in the past. It's like, I like your stuff. I wouldn't hang it on my wall though. I wouldn't hang it on my
Yeah.
wall. This is, I mean, it's really great to hear this point of view and kind of and just to see, you know, these challenges, you know, that you've had to deal with, and still consistently produce this magnificent book, this beautiful book, um, and and really kind of be able to kind of dig into this subject matter and document it in such a fantastic way that builds on its history, that is a legacy in itself. And I think that's incredible. I really do. And I do think it's something that the photographic world will catch up to in time, you know, or the art world will catch up into in time. And one of the reasons I think that is that creativity in itself is a weird thing, you know, that for me it's almost tied, you know, it's a kind of mediumship in itself, you know. There's something happening there. There's a compulsion that we don't necessarily understand, but we feel absolutely driven to go and do a thing. Um and you know, there's a huge amount of accounts of people kind of talking about their own kind of creative experiences where, you know, they receive something, they receive poetry, they receive songs, they receive melodies, you know, or they receive a drive to go and do documentary work or an artistic endeavor of some description. So I think they're, you know, in some way intrinsically intertwined. That the creative impulse and the broad spiritual world are somehow intertwined. I think if you've got a real kind of creative flair, that there's part of you that will be drawn to some kind of spiritual expression, be that, you know, ritual magic or occultism or witchcraft, or indeed kind of exploring spirituality. Now, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, when I ask myself, you know, why am I not done with this topic, or why have I stayed with it, or why am I here? You know, why am I doing this? Why can't I move on? And I do think why I continue is because I realize that whatever is happening with mediumship and spiritualism, it is deeply tied to creativity itself. And um, there's something about the process that speaks to a larger aspect of our humanity in terms of like creativity and even birth and death. And it's kind of this intersection. I see the intersection between spiritualism, photography, life and death as this like insanely rich crossroads. Because, you know, photography is like, you make the living dead and the dead alive through a photograph. You know, somebody who is alive is frozen in time, and then somebody who's dead is present as well. Like there's all these really heavy metaphysical and time travel aspects to photography, and life and death itself, and the creative process, and even like the way mediums talk about, like, just having a hard time putting it all into, but there's a lot to unpack there at that point, I think. So, and definitely the creativity thing is what keeps me interested.
Um, Shannon, I've taken a lot of your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I absolutely, I love your work. You know,
Thank you.
I really am I'm a big fan. Very inspiring. Where's the best place for people to find you, or if they want to get a copy of your book? Where's the best place to do that?
So on my website, shannontaggart.com, and the book, there's not that many copies left, but I think there are a few at fulgur.co.uk, Fulgur Press. And there's a link to that on my website, to Fulgur Press. And hopefully there'll be another edition coming out soon, but it's not in the print. I mean, publishing is strange now, but like with the virus and everything, it's doubly strange. So I'm not really sure, when there'll be more, but I think there are still some available there. And my website, I have a mailing list too. And I do send updates, and I do sometimes host online presentations and such. So
cool. Well, I'll put the links in the show notes for everybody to have a look.
great.
As I said, it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. Really interesting to talk photography and exploring this kind of territory with someone as accomplished as Shannon. And she has some really great food for thought. Okay, so I'll leave it there and talk to you soon. Take care.